Mr Speaker.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker.
Kia ora.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, kia ora. Look, if there's one thing you can say about this debate in the last, 10, 12 hours, is that it's been robust. It's been in good spirits. I think it's proven the immutable fact of Godwin's law incredibly fast, thanks to New Zealand's first. But also we shouldn't, forget that this is an incredibly important issue. This is a symbol of our nation, a symbol of the collective populace of New Zealand, and it's something which, despite being polarising in this House, despite being polarising outside this House, has always been polarising. Now, if you cast your eyes back to the 10th of July 1834, when Hone Heke and his band at Kororareka chopped down that first flagpole. An incredibly polarising issue, identifying the importance of flags as symbolic, in this case symbolic of the Union Jack and the power of the British Crown. Now, it was cut down a second time. It was then cut down a third time after being sheathed in iron to protect it. It eventually led to something being known as the Flagstaff War. So while passions are risen and everyone's got their own positions, and it is a polarising debate, it's something which has always happened throughout New Zealand history, and it's fantastic we can keep it peaceful. Now, flags are important because they have a long history, from the Sassanids using it as battle standards and Roman legionaries, in 1748 when the Danish picked the first flag, which they still have today, the Donnebrog, through to the Union Jack symbolising the merger of those independent nations of the United Kingdom. It's had an powerful history. You can see it, Mr Speaker, I'm actually off to California today for a private study tour for the parliamentary recess. And when you're in the States, you can see the stars and stripes hanging from so many households. You'd never see that in New Zealand, and we've all got a view. I'm definitely of the opinion we should change our flag. I think it's anachronistic. I think we shouldn't have the Union Jack on it, despite the history. But what we do know is that the flag has always had an association with passions, but also warfare. From the original classical history through to the Middle Ages, through to when we adopted our current flag in 1902 with the pomp and patriotism of the South African War in the background. Now, there are legitimate allegations that this is simply a distraction. Flags and flag waving have been used as political distractions, and the Green Party absolutely agrees there are much more important issues we should be addressing today. I believe we should be having a more broader conversation, which is, who are we as a nation? Where is our country going in 2015, and what do we stand for? And unfortunately, we've had a debate around geometric patterns and not about those fundamental questions, such as how do we build Te Tiriti a Waitangi into our constitutional frameworks? How do we have a debate around should we have a New Zealander as a head of state? These are some of the missed opportunities. But on the positive side of the ledger, I'd like to say how fantastic it is to be here, that Parliament is passing this bill, a bill that's about choice. Now, yesterday when I introduced this bill, it was about choice. The problem, of course, was that politics had gotten in the way. We'd seen an absolute groundswell of support for the Red Peak option. However, politics got in the way. And we've seen that in this debate, where political point scoring seems to be more of a focus than the constructive approach. Now, we put the bill to try and break the political deadlock because New Zealanders were sitting at home watching politicians in this House trading letters, trading accusations, trying to score political points. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. The countdown to the referendum in only 6 weeks' time was looming, and New Zealanders risked not having the legitimate groundswell of support reflected in the official referendum coming up. I'd like to point out that this referendum was going to go ahead anyway. I'd like to reiterate the Green Party doesn't support changing the flag. The $26 million this country, the taxpayer is spending, I believe, would be much better served spent on breakfasts for hungry kids. Putting a solar panel on every single school in the country so they can stop paying rising power bills and buy music and sports equipment. It's not the most important issue. We've saw a flawed process. However, the law had passed, the Green Party had voted against it and opposed spending the money on changing the flag, but the way it was going, a flawed process was going to be even more flawed with worse outcomes. So I'm glad that parties in this Parliament could work across party lines to improve the process. It was happening anyway, and I'm proud that we've managed to improve it. My big fear was that, and we know it was young people who engaged, I believe, most with the red peak flag. My big fear, Mr. Speaker, was that had of this Parliament ignored that massive groundswell, we simply would have disillusioned those tens of thousands of Kiwis who maybe for the first time engaged with a political issue. Now, the solution was a simple, constructive bill. Mr. Speaker, I didn't introduce the bill to score points. I didn't introduce this bill to raise other issues as raised by the Honourable Trevor Mallard. This bill was simply about trying to break that political deadlock. It didn't try and relitigate the entire referendum process. And I understand the Labour Party's position, I understand it well, I'm sympathetic to it, but the fact is that we risked playing politics and not seeing the outcome that New Zealanders wanted. So I'm glad that this pragmatic, constructive, positive solution has been picked up and adopted by the 6 parties supporting it. I'd like to pick up on the criticism of the Honourable Trevor Mallard that for some reason, by not mentioning red peak in the clauses, there's a conspiracy theory. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Council Office was assisting with the drafting, and I think his criticism, in fact, is a criticism labelled at those officials, and it's a well-established precedent with parliamentary drafting that this House cannot instruct the Governor-General. Now, obviously, in the original Act, what the legislation set out was that there was an official flag process which made a recommendation to the Governor-General to adopt an order in Council. So I think it was a distraction, another part of playing politics. I'd also lastly like to acknowledge this was not the ideal way to pass this bill to see the red flag and red peak included. We didn't have to pass this under urgency. We could have worked together earlier. Perhaps the Cabinet could have agreed earlier to include the red peak option based on that legitimate, absolute groundswell. So there was a genuine problem. Politics was the problem, and I'm glad that the Green Party has managed to find a constructive solution, and I'd like to once again thank the government for adopting my bill as a government bill so we can see it passed. So in the coming 6 weeks, when New Zealanders are sitting around their kitchen tables, they may be in their office and they're filling in their referendum ballot forms, I'm absolutely proud, glad and pleased that they will get a 5th option. They can choose the red peak if they want, they can choose the silver fern if they want, and down the line they can choose to keep the flag, the current flag, if they want. Because ultimately this bill was all about choice. So when Kiwis are filling out those ballot forms and sending them in, they will have more good choice, and I believe that's beneficial and a great example of this Parliament working together. I guess the action going forward, which we should be mindful of, as we've set an example that we can work together when it comes to the flag, can we also work together on some of the more important issues facing our nation? We've worked together on the flag, we've found a compromise, a constructive way forward. Why can't we do it when it comes to climate change? Why can't we do it when it comes to feeding hungry kids? Perhaps the original referendum which established MMP and saw an MMP solution in the House today could also lead to more MMP solutions of working across party lines. Lastly and finally, I'd like to thank the teams involved in the drafting of the legislation. I'd like to thank my caucus for their support. I'd like to thank the 6 parties for their votes in Parliament. I'm confident this bill will pass with an overwhelming majority because Kiwis deserve a choice, which is fantastic. So for all those doubters who thought that red peak had peaked, it clearly hasn't peaked. It's not over yet. Let's support Kiwis having a choice. Kia ora koutou, kia ora.